Hi David! Welcome everyone! Just noodling away, just practicing my soloing before we get going. Hope you're all doing well. So welcome to my next live lesson. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take everything that we learned in the first How to Solo lesson. We're going to practice that a little bit more and talk about what makes a really good solo, because we slightly rushed through that at the end. And then a large thing from today, hi David, hi Pierre, a large thing that we're going to do from today is to really look at modes, what modes are, how you can use them functionally to extend your solo range. So there's kind of 2 or 3 different ways you can use them, and they can really enable you to extend your soloing and allow you to do some really, really brilliant things. So yeah, loads coming. Oh, thanks Jennifer. This is my bow hand, and I absolutely adore this ukulele. Hi Esther, hope you're keeping well. Hot in Normandy. Yeah, it's been warm here, although no windows in this room, so I'm okay here. Fabulous. Just whilst I'm welcoming a few more people before we get going, you might notice up here I've got a little flyer for the next Can a Cappella session. So I actually got a bit ahead for myself once today, which is quite unusual for me. And I was arranging some songs for the next Can a Cappella on Monday, and I was doing some quite kind of emotive songs because I thought it'd be nice to do something modern-ish. I was looking at REM, Everybody Hurts, and a few things like that, Fix You by Coldplay. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we kind of made something of this? So something that's really close to my heart, as many of you that will know me as friends and as their teacher and whatnot, is mental health issues. So it's something that I'm quite open to talking about that I struggled with in the past. And I've last year I did a big long walk, didn't I, 100 miles to kind of help raise money for the Beat charity and raise awareness. And I was trying to think of ways I could combine the two again this year. I haven't got the energy for a 100-mile walk this year. I'm going to save that for next year, and perhaps I'm going to get some of you to join me. But what we're going to do on Mondays Can a Cappella, is we're going to look at songs that are kind of really beautiful, really comforting and really uplifting. So we're going to kind of help combat loneliness. You know, if you're feeling a little bit down, it will really raise you, and it'll kind of allow us to kind of talk about a few things as well, which I think is really cool. And the main thing I wanted to say is that instead of your usual super kind donations, on Monday I'm going to encourage everyone to donate to Mind instead, which is the UK's leading mental health charity. They really help and empower people with mental health problems. But they also campaign for better services as well. So come along Monday, 6 o'clock, usual Can a Cappella, but don't chuck any money my way, chuck it their way to Mind. All the details are on the website. So how's everyone doing today? Hope you're all keeping well and you're not melting too much in this hot temperature. Sorry, my logo's randomly decided to make itself bigger and smaller. There we go. Okay, so what I wanted to do right from the off today is just have a wee bit of a catch up from the last soloing session. Now, don't panic if you weren't at that session. You might think, oh no, I can't do this, I missed it all. We're going on to new stuff today, but we're also going to reiterate stuff that was in that session. So don't panic. If you didn't do the first one, you can still enjoy today loads. And you'll notice that your first few worksheets, these are all available for download still, and just follow the links in the description. We've got some of those scales we looked at last time, so major pentatonic, minor pentatonic and the blues scales. And I thought it might be quite nice just to kind of have a practice of a couple of those, perhaps with a backing track, and talk about a few things that we rushed through last time in terms of what makes a good solo. So just as a reminder, I think of when you're learning scales, there are so many, it can almost be quite overwhelming which ones to use in which tracks. So I find it the most useful thing to do is, if you're just starting out soloing, is to stick to a few that you know are going to sound really nice and that you know that you can rely on. And for me, that's the pentatonics. So pentatonic scales are just 5-note scales, penta, 5 tonic tones, 5 tones, and it's going to take out those 2 notes that clash with some of the chords. Okay, so depending on what song you're playing, you're going to match the key. So say we're playing a song in C major, we would use a C major pentatonic. We also learnt that you can use the relative minor pentatonic, but let's not worry about that for now. If a song was in, I don't know, B minor, you could use the B minor pentatonic, and so on and so forth. Literally just match like for like. Just wanted to say thanks, Jennifer. That's really, really lovely message. So yeah, absolutely. I think today people are finding it harder and harder to access services that can help as well. So I'm really, really keen to do anything we can. We live in some kind of strange times, don't we? For sure. So let's take one of those. Sorry, get distracted, but in a good way. Thanks, Jennifer. Let's take one of those scales and just have a bit of a noodle round and a bit of a play. So let's have a look at the C major pentatonic. Now, there's a couple of places you can play that. The most obvious is just to keep it in open position. So we're going to have a look at the first diagram on your first page. No worries, Val. I hope you're keeping well. Good to see you again. You can always catch up later on. So the only thing about this C major pentatonic that scale is that we start with some open notes. So let me talk you through it. Let me get my close angle. We'll go through it together. Some of you will already know this like back of your hand. For some of you, it might be quite new. So first of all, we're going to play an open C. That's your low C, second string down. Notice that I'm putting my finger behind the nut. You don't have to, but it just helps to learn the shape, okay? Then we've got the second fret of the C string for D. Another open string, this next one, so open E. Then I'm going to a G note over here on the E string, an open A, and a high C here just to finish it off. So it's just the C major scale without an F and a B. So we go C, D, E, G, A, C. Or if you like thinking in terms of numbers, starting from the C string, we're going to do off 2, off 3, off 3. Kind of symmetrical, isn't it, those bottom twos? So just to get us thinking about some nice things we can do with this, let's have a quick, let's just play a backing track and perhaps play that up and down. So I've got a backing track I just stole off YouTube, but I'm going to provide a link to the track, so it's doing them a service in the long run. I've recorded it onto my iPad and I'll just play it in the background. All of the backing tracks that I use today, I've listed in the description. I've added them in about 10 minutes ago, so if you looked earlier, you might not have seen them. So after we finish this session, if you want to practice using the same tracks, they're there. So let's load up a track. Let me know if it's too loud. Esther, you're normally brilliant at noticing sound levels. Let me know if this is crazy loud or you can still hear me. We're going to play this backing track, okay, in the background. Just see, allow it to come in. It's just chords in C major, basically, going in the background. And what we're going to do, first off, just join with me, we're just going to play through that C major pentatonic scale one note at a time. You'll soon get what I'm on about. Come in with me after 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. C, D, E, G, A, C, and rest. Just try that again, but we'll do a few notes on each. Off, that's C, 2 is D, open E, 3 is G, open A, C, lovely. And we can keep that going round and round, but let's look at what could make that sound really nice. So I had a sheet in the first site which was all of the things that would make a nice solo, and here they are. Where's my sheet? I had it somewhere. Bear with me a second. It's disappeared off my computer. There we go. Oh, it's disappeared, but I've got it next to me. I'll tell you what, I'll do it the old-fashioned way. Here it is. This is in your first set of worksheets, but don't worry, I'm going to go through these in a bit more detail. So we're already kind of affecting a note choice, aren't we? Because we've used that C major pentatonic. The next thing we need to do is think about phrasing. So I want you to have another little go of that backing track in just a minute. But just like I said last time, instead of just playing endless notes or playing it up and down in order, add some little phrases in. So when we talk, I'm purposefully kind of highlighting it now, you have little phrases or sentences, a little pause, and then you have another sentence, and you speak in phrases. If I spoke like this without ever stopping and just keeping talking again and again and just never stopping, it would get really hard to understand, right? So what we want to do is just create some little phrases. So if I give you an example, and then I'm going to leave you to have a little play. So for instance, I could do just a few notes as a little open phrase. That could be a phrase, just CDC. There's another one. There's another one. Notice simple, but it sounds really effective. It could be a longer phrase. Little pause. Here's another. Really simple and effective. Whereas if I just... That's not very nice, is it? So grab your uke. I'm going to keep this backing track going. Try adding a little bit of phrasing using that C major pentatonic scale. I'm going to be quiet in the background. Hi Pete, no worries mate, you'll soon catch up. Just practicing our C major pentatonic scale. It's the first diagram in your sheet. And let's have a rest. Good. So phrasing is going to be super important, and when we get into the modes, that's everything that we're learning now we're going to apply. So don't worry, we're going to really get into the modes in a lot of detail in a minute. Let's have a look at space. So space goes hand in hand with phrasing, doesn't it? Miles Davis was the musician, I think, that coined the phrase, the notes that you don't play are as important as the ones you do. And the classic example, isn't it, is on So What, the opening track to Kind of Blue. And he was around at a time when all the beboppers were playing like a million notes a second. And then he came up with this beautiful doop-a-doop-a-doop-a-doo, ba-ba, doop-a-doop-a-doop-a-doo, ba-ba. Just beautiful two-note introduction to the piece. And people loved it because it's just, that space was allowing the bass to come through. And then he was adding some notes. So I want you to solo again. I'll give you another little example. This time I want you to put tons of space in. You'll see what I mean. So, for example, keep them simple. Nothing for a little while now. Give it a good little rest. I'm really exaggerating it. Have a big bit of space. Big bit of space. Okay. Now you have a little try. Think about that space. Really emote those nice little phrases, perhaps a wee bit of vibrato at the end. Keep them, guys. And for Pete and anyone that was a bit late for today, the notes are 0-2 on the C string, 0-3 on the E string, and 0-3 on the A string. It's your C major pentatonic scale. Or you can play the A string and just play any of the dots. Keep it going a little while, just enjoy yourselves. And then at the end of this, I'd love you guys to tell me how you got on. See if it helped your soloing, see if it kind of brought it to life a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, and relax. There we go. go. Absolutely brilliant. So next up, we've got timing. This is the next up on my sheet. And again, don't worry if you haven't got this sheet from the first ones. Seeing as you're on the second one, I might just stick it in the description anyway, so you've got it. But next thing we're going to look at is timing. Now this is really interesting. There's a guy called Victor Wooten who I think is an amazing music theorist. He wrote a book called The Music Lesson, which is really brilliant and inspiring. It's just a great book. And he gives the classic example of timing being super important. Quite often we start to put a little feeling of kind of phrasing in and we'll have space. But sometimes we'll play the same kind of phrases starting from beat 1. So if you think about when you're playing music and we've got the beats 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So many soloists will start their first note of the solo on beat 1. But by starting on beat 2 or 3, you get a completely different feel. Sounds crazy, right? But I'll show you what I mean. Again, same backing track in the background. Just have a listen. Okay, so the beats 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's make up a little riff. Let's just do that. Actually, no, let's do it in the C major pentatonic, sorry. Let's do E and G. Notice if I start that riff on beat 1, it sounds a certain way. 1, 2, 3, 4. If I start it on beat 2, it'll sound slightly different. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. If I start it on beat 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. So, sounds daft, but sometimes vary your little kind of riffs or little phrases in your solo. Think about starting them on different beats. That's probably quite hard to hear with the backing track and all the drums and everything, but just have an experiment with that. The easiest thing is to think if you're just starting a song and someone's about to strike that first chord, don't solo until beat 2 or 3 and you'll get this really nice kind of entry coming in. It's a really nice thing to think of. We've got a few other things on here. We've got rhythm and groove, which are obviously important again. We've got varying what beat you started on, which we've got already. But really try and feel the piece of music. You kind of need to match the kind of feel for the piece of music, haven't you? This kind of piece is quite it's quite emotive in some ways, isn't it? If I just I can imagine this being in a soft rock track. So I'm going to keep little phrases, just a bit of groove. But it's not going to be super groovy like you'd have in the blues, right? So you want to make it appropriate. Say I played, here's a nice kind of jazzy backing track. Have a listen to this. Now, if I did that groove before, it's going to sound really weird, right? Because this has a mellow tone, so this one I'd probably try and keep the notes as fluid as possible. Maybe little flurries of notes. The groove has changed completely. Do you notice that? It doesn't need much at all. So I'm going to match that. You have a go. This is just a lovely jazz backing track, 2-5-1 progression. See if you can match the feel of this one. The groove is subtle. You want smooth note changes. Really relaxed. Have a little play. talk about two more and then we'll get onto those modes, because I know some of you are really excited about learning about the modes. So let's just have a look at articulation and tone. It's basically meaning a similar thing. So articulation is how you attack the note. So are you going to kind of have quite a staccato, or are you going to keep it a smooth kind of attack? Again, that's kind of going to be appropriate in terms of the music, isn't it? So this jazz one, you want a very smooth sound. Whereas like a rock piece, or particularly the blues, I'll kind of have a starker attack. In fact, on the blues, I'll sometimes push my uke so much. So it kind of, you get those buzzes, because you want that. That was a purposeful buzz, I promise. Did you hear that? Because it kind of gives that gritty tone that you want. You almost want that feel of kind of early 20th century southern states, don't you, America, which is really nice. So really think about your articulation and tone as well. And the next live lesson is going to be all about tone and how to create a nice tone. So let's think about how we could create some tone here for these two different types of solos. The first one, the jazz one that we're playing at the moment, I want a really mellow tone, don't I, on my ukulele to match the kind of feel of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the middle part of my thumb. Okay, if you haven't got a nail, I've got quite a long nail there, you can use the pad of your thumb, but still keep your arm at almost a right angle to the strings. Can you see that? Let me come in close. So, where are we? This would probably be better. There we go, that's probably best. See how my thumb is almost coming straight down? Try and get my arm out of the way. It's not like this. The arm is raised, so the thumb is coming down. There we go, onto the strings. Not like this. We want it like this. If I'm like this, have a listen to the tone it produces. If I just do a couple of notes. Quite tinny, right? If I do exactly the same thing with my thumb this way, notice how much more mellow it is. And this part of the ukulele, when we play up here, we call it dolce, or sweet in Italian. So maybe play a few notes in the jazz piece up here. Keeping it as smooth as possible. Give you an example. A little bit of vibrato helps. Again, nothing super fancy. If I was back here, it's not going to work, right? It's too much attack. I want to have a go with this piece, keeping that in mind. Use that middle part of your thumb. You're trying to get as much warmth as you possibly can. Give it a try. Match that smooth feel of the piece. Now, what if I wanted to create a bit more drama and a bit more kind of, a bit more drive? Let's go back to that C major backing track with all the nice acoustic guitars and everything. What we could do is we could either play with our thumb further back. That's going to give us a more kind of, we call it ponte playing back here because it's near the bridge. It's going to give you a greater staccato feel and almost a bit of treble. So let me go back to that C backing track, and if I do a similar thing now, you'll notice it's going to have a lot more power to it. It's really cutting through, isn't it? If I want to exaggerate that even more, I might pick with my nails using Pima style picking. Those notes are really pinging now, right? If I wanted soft again, but if I want that attack, totally different tone, right? Have a try with this one. See if you can use those nails this time and come back over the sound hole. Get some attack. Go on. Let me know how you're getting on at the end. Dominique, cool. I saw your email. Brilliant, mate. Really glad. Hi, Sally. Hi, Pete. Strings are on the way, mate. Okay, let's... 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and stop. Good. Okay, right, now relax. Now, you might think, gosh, that was a large amount of time just going into kind of the ways that you can make your solo sound and not actually talking about the note choices. Partly that's because with the pentatonic stuff, we covered some of that last week, but more importantly, the way you play something is as important as what you play. I'm a real strong believer in that. Think of that pentatonic scale. It's only 5 notes. So if you're just playing those 5 notes with no inspiration, whatever, again and again, it's going to sound rubbish, right? But just putting a bit of personality in, thinking about groove, timing, space, it really lifts your solo. And that's really important because when we come to talk about modes, which we're literally just about to, you want it to sound nice. There's no good just playing these scales and just playing through them. They're not going to sound like a solo. So this stuff that I've talked about in this opening section is really important, and we'll repeat some of it as we go along. But let's get into the kind of the meat of today then, says the vegetarian. Let's have a look at how we can use the modes. First of all, I'll talk about what they are. So part of the reason we use the modes, just before I show you exactly where they are and how to play them, is to extend a solo out. So say I was playing the C major scale rather than C pentatonic. That's just like C pentatonic, only we had the B and the F back in. That's the scale that most people know, right? It's the one the first you're taught. Well, I can play all of the same notes in this scale in different places on the ukulele using modes. So notice now I can play all over the fretboard, and sometimes you might see some of your favourite guitarists, like, I don't know, Clapton. People are going to turn off and throw eggs at me now, but I'm not a big fan of Eric Clapton. Partly that was because of his beliefs on certain things, which weren't very nice. But I guess he was a good guitarist, but I think there's better. I like the old blues guys. Anyway, someone like Clapton, or whatever, let's go for Muddy Waters for the sake of it. You'll notice that they play all over the fretboard with ease. And you might think, how are they doing that? How are they remembering all those notes there are? But they've learnt these little systems or shapes that you can move up and down the fretboard, and that's what I'm going to teach you today. So believe it or not, with a bit of work using the sheets that I've given you today, you're going to be able to do exactly what I just did and turn it into shapes that you can use all over the fretboard. And that is my favourite use of modes. There are some other uses, and I'll show you that in a minute after we've talked about what on earth they are. So in essence, a mode, we can think of it as a scale starting on a different scale degree. Sounds weird, right? It's easier to show you than to explain it. Let's just have a look one more time at that classic C major scale, okay? It's like the C pentatonic we just learnt, but we're going to put the D and the... we're going to put the F and a B back in. So that would be C, D, off 2 on the C string. And then we'd have E, F, G, off 1, 3 on the E string, off 1, 3. And then we'd have A, B, C, off 2, 3 on the A string. Okay, so C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. That's our classic C major scale, isn't it, that everyone knows and loves. Well, what people used to do way back when, before just thinking about major and minor scales in use in composing and performing, what people used to do is they used to start these scales from a different scale degree. That would give you a new mode. So if I play the C major scale, but this time I'm going to start from D. D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. There's my high D on that fifth fret there. Notice if I do that again, it has a slightly different feel. It doesn't feel as upbeat as that one. Feels a little bit minory, like there's a little bit of something going on, but it's exactly the same notes that make up the C major scale. We call that the D Dorian scale. Whenever we start from the second degree, D in this case, we call it the D Dorian. And that's what these modes do. Each one has its own little personality. Even though you're playing exactly the same notes as the major scale, because you start and finish in a different place, our ear hears them as their own individual scale. And when you start and finish in the different places, the intervals between, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 are different. Let me give you another one. In fact, let's do this one together. Let's play the E Phrygian scale. And I'm going to show you all of these, don't worry. The E Phrygian scale is just the C major scale starting from E. Okay, so we'll play E, F, G, 0, 1, 3 on the E string. Then we'll carry on up the C major scale with A, B, C, 0, 2, 3. And then for D and E, we're going to do 5 and 7 on the A string. Okay, so you can practice that up and down if you like, but just have a listen to how it sounds. Going to do that again. It's almost got, I wouldn't say menace, but it's almost got like a sadness about it, hasn't it? So again, it sounds quite different from a happy-go-lucky C major scale, just because it's starting and ending in a different place. And depending on which scale degree you start on, every one of these has a different name. And because this system is older than just using major and minor scales, it actually goes back to kind of ancient Greece, the names. So basically the names are Greek islands or places in Greece: Dorian, Phrygian, Ionian. They're all places in Greece, right? So that's kind of, this shows you kind of how old this stuff is. And each one of those has a different one. We've got C, the first one, the major one, we call Ionian. Then we have Dorian, E Phrygian, F Lydian, G Mixolydian, and so on and so forth. So that's how the modes come about. So in one key, it's just starting the same notes from a different place. That's the easiest way to think about it. If you prefer, you can think about it as intervals. So you can use these in all different keys and the intervals will be different. Now this can be a bit of a kind of head mess, so I don't want to kind of, I don't want you to overthink this. But the intervals, when we do a normal major scale, we start with the first note, then we have a whole step to E, a whole, to D, a whole step to D, a whole step to E, half step to F, whole step to G, a whole step to A, whole step to B, and then finally a half step to C. So the intervals, if we call it, are whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. If we start from D for D Dorian, the intervals are different, okay? So we've got D, then we've got a whole, a half straight away, a whole, another whole, another whole, a half, and the last one is a whole rather than a half. These will all be written down later on. Don't have to panic about this. And this, if you want to look up all the different intervals, they're in my uke theory book as well. I'll show you that at the end. So every mode has its own set of intervals, and that gives them a flavour. And that's what I want to look at now, because that's where things get really, really exciting. You can spend the whole of your rest of your life learning these modes. We're just going to go a few at a time. But I want to show you their different personalities, because that allows you to do something really cool with them later on, which I think you'll really love. So if we do the C major scale, that has quite a happy-go-lucky personality. I'll keep that backing track on, but I'll just do it low in the background, just so it gives you something to hear it against. If I go up and down that C major scale, we call it C Ionian. The first mode is called an Ionian mode. Notice the kind of feel that it has. Let's have a little play of this. Can you see it's kind of quite light, isn't it? It's like your ABC scale, if you like. It's kind of it just like your one chord when we talk about chords as having personalities. The Ionian is your brightest, happiest scale. Let's have a look at the Dorian. I'll explain the shapes of these in a minute, and then I'll teach you how to play them. But just have a listen. I'm going to do the same thing. The Dorian scale has a touch of sadness, but not too much. Have a listen. Oops, pressed the wrong button. Have a listen. Did you detect that? Now, those that know me know I'm a bit of a melancholic soul, and that's why the Dorian scale is the same, is my favourite. If you have your own personality, you might match yourself to one of these modes. If I was a mode, I'd be the Dorian mode. I'm a little bit melancholy, but I'm not like going around pulling my hair out all day. So that's me, I'm the Dorian. Let me do one more, just an example, so you can hear all the different personalities. The Phrygian mode, which is literally still the C major scale, just starting from E, has the darkest of the modes, or sometimes you can think of it as the saddest, the heartbreak. So if you want a really sad sounding solo, this is the one you'll use. Have a listen. Whoops, help if I play the right one, sorry, give me just a sec. There we go. It's kind of to me. It's like the most emotive one to me. When I play that, there's something in me, and unless you're a robot, you should feel this a little bit. It's almost like something pulls at my heartstring when I play the Phrygian mode. Another use is I can't play like Santana. I could solo, but I can't solo like the great soloists. But Santana was really used the Phrygian in almost all his solos because he liked the darkness, and it's used a lot in kind of Spanish music. You know, that kind of. You can almost imagine like the flamencos coming out, right? That's kind of almost like a flamenco style riff, that one. You've probably heard of the piece Malaguena. That's got that kind of feel, hasn't it? That Spanish flavour. Well, Malaguena is all written using the Phrygian mode. And this is how people used to compose things. Back in the day, rather than using just a major scale or a minor scale, major having a very bright feel, minor scale having a dark melancholy feel, they use these modes, and the beauty of them is that their personalities fall somewhere between just happy and sad. Like I said, that Dorian mode is slightly melancholic, but it's not as heartbreaky as the E Phrygian. So you can compose using these. If you're writing a melody, you could do all of the notes from one of these scales and it would sound super. And traditionally, when you're taught these in kind of music college back in a way, they talk about them in levels of brightness, with the Ionian being the brightest, like the happiest, and Phrygian being the darkest, and then you get all the shades in between. So let's kind of have a play with that. Let's pick one of the modes so that we can learn a few notes and kind of see how it might have a different feel. In fact, let's stick with E Phrygian, since it's right there on the screen. Okay, so this is page 4 in your sheets if you've got them printed out. I was going to tell you something else about it, but I'm going to save that for a minute. Let's just play it. So whenever you start a new mode and you're playing it across the strings rather than up one string, it's best to reset your hand. So you know how when you play the C major scale down here, we probably end up with our third finger here. Well, we want to reset. So what I want you to do is use your index finger on the 4th fret of the C string. So index, 4th fret of the C string, pick that. Second finger comes on the 5th fret. Reach up with either your little or your third to hear the 7th fret. So I've got 4, 5, 7. You can hear that is the start of Malaguena, isn't it? Da, 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 da. Anyway, I digress. Shows you how kind of it's used in flamenco. 4, 5, 7. Then we go on to the next string. We're going to go 5, 7, 8. And then finally, we're going to come back to the 5th fret of the A string, and we're going to go to the 7th fret there. Let me start that again. So from the C string, we've got 4, 5, 7, E string, 5, 7, 8, and then on the A string, 5, 7. Can you feel that difference, especially those first 3 notes? Because we've got a half step and a whole step, rather than in the C major having a whole step and a whole step, it changes the feel, doesn't it, completely? That first half step gives it a minor feel, and that's why it sounds the way it does. So let's play a backing track and let you play around with that, okay? If you're more confident, you could play around with the whole of that scale, going up and down. But if not, just try those first 3 notes. And again, there's a lot you can do with 3 notes. Have a listen. So you don't have to do tons of notes. Have a little try. Just play around that scale. Let me turn this up so you can hear it against the backing track. Use everything we've learnt so far. Think about your phrasing. A few notes at a time and have a rest. It's getting quite intense here, so maybe use that articulation to really dig in, get some volume going here. Good. 1, 2, 3, 4, rest. Okay, cool. So hopefully you're using some of those skills we've learnt earlier. Just before we go on, we've got a great question. Why no notes on the G string? So, good question. It's purely to make it simple for both types of ukulele, basically, and you'll find this in a lot of books. So because the C string is our lowest string of our ukulele, it's easier to start these modes from C on the C string and then build up. So C, D, E. It kind of confuses things if you go on to the G string, because the G string is a higher note than the C string. So then you'd have high to low and then going higher again, which really confuses the ear. So by starting on the C string, which is our lowest string, we're going from the lowest note just up in a linear fashion to the highest note. If you've got a low G, you can actually use the notes on the low G string as well to kind of have a lower, a way of playing lower. And one of my favourite tips, and this works with any scale on the ukulele, almost any scale anyway, is when you've got a scale which uses the C string, like those first three notes, right, of that Phrygian scale. If you've got a low G string, you can do exactly the same shape on the G string, and it works. So you instantly extend the scale, and that works with almost any scale. It's all to do with the physics of the C string is 5 below the G string, or in this case, because we've got low G string the other way around, right? It's a fifth, the difference between a C and a G. C, D, E, F, G. And we love the sounds of notes that are a fifth above. That's why it's called a perfect fifth in the old-fashioned one. So that's why any scale in the world that you're playing in a shape, you can do the same shape you do on the C string on the G string. So you can extend it out that way. And a lot of books will kind of give you the option. In fact, my book, I'm not very good at selling things. Esther will tell you that. She's always saying I need to get more confident, and she's right about selling things. My book, this is called the Ukulele Reference Book I wrote for my friend John. He's the handsome chap on the back playing ukulele in his caravan. We decided when we wrote out the modes, and we've got all the modes written out, we would show two ways of playing them, so you can think of them as a shape. There we go, that'll do. And you can see the reentrant, that just means high G starts from the C string, because the G string would complicate it. But we also have a linear version starting from the low G string. And the squares just tell you where to start. So if you want to play the C Ionian mode, you start with that square being on a C, on the C string, and so on and so forth. We just found that was really useful. And thinking in terms of shapes is the easiest way to remember these. If you try and learn them as all the notes all over the fretboard straight away, it's really difficult, isn't it? But if you think of it as just a shape, it's not so bad. I bet loads of you, when you learnt that C major scale, you probably think of that in terms of a shape. You can probably do that without thinking. I want you to do the same with the Phrygian. Just think of it as the kind of the no gap, big gap. And then we start it over and we've got big gap, no gap. And then we go back to the fifth and we've got big gap. So you can see the shape, right? That those kind of notes, they fall into a particular shape. And you can learn those notes that way. It's a really nice way of doing it. Okay. What I'd like to do now is just to explore the different feel that you get between the modes now. So we got a feel that the E Phrygian was giving us like a kind of a heartbreaky kind of feel, right? So just before we get on to a little bit more learning about the modes, I just want you to practice one last time. This time when we start the track, I want you to solo using that C major scale, right? That's all the blue dots. Let's move it down so you can see. You can do them in any order. And yet that low G thing works on major and minor and pentatonics. And then switch out if you can to that E Phrygian. And I'm just going to leave that going. Have an experiment. Change between the Ionian and the Phrygian. Then I'm going to show you something magic and you're going to go, yay! Promise. Make sure you're swapping out between that Ionian and Phrygian. At the end, I'd love to know if you can feel the difference. If you do, give me a like or comments so I know. A little bit longer. And 1, 2, 3, 4, rest. Cool, good stuff. So hopefully already you're finding some use for these. Now here's the other little bit of magic, right? As well as thinking of these as having their own personality, and I will come back to that, I'll really assert that so you know which personality is which in a second. But as well as that, notice that they're extending your scale out by using shapes. So if you feel when you're soloing in the key of C that you're stuck here, you kind of, you know your C major scale, so you can play around these first 3 frets and you can feel relatively confident. But you've got all of this uke, which has different timbres, tone, and you can really be expressive. The other cool thing about modes is you can take a major scale and extend it out, because remember, the modes are just the same notes in a different order. So if you get used to playing C major scale here, and you want to explore up the fretboard, you could then start playing the Phrygian. Okay, and that takes you out. I mean, that's already giving you notes all over the fretboard up to fret 7, isn't it? Which is absolutely amazing. You could also combine that with the Dorian, the D Dorian. And by the way, if you wonder about the order of these, they just go in the alphabet. The reason I've got the C Ionian and E Phrygian on one page is that the Dorian overlaps slightly with both of them, so it looks really messy. So I've done the Dorian on the next page, I believe it is. There we go. The D Dorian in second position. Esther's got a really nice analogy. I like that. The Ionian feels like using primary colours and the Phrygian is more pastels. Yeah. And isn't this amazing? I found it really enlightening when I learnt about modes. And I saw, like, when you listen to medieval music, there's a lot of that. In fact, loads of medieval music is in Phrygian mode because it has a real darkness to it. Think of all that kind of Gregorian stuff and all that. Ma da 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 da. It kind of has that dark feel to it, doesn't it? And that's because they were using these minor-y modes rather than just the minor scale. So you think of them as different flavours. Ah, Pete, you've made my day. Thank you, thank you. Okay, cool. So we've learnt C Ionian, happy, happy. E Phrygian, oh my gosh, my girlfriend's just left me, heartbreak. And D Dorian is somewhere in the middle. It's a little bit melancholy, okay? Now, again, I won't go through the fingerings of all these, but you know how they work. You've just got to apply the same fingerings we did for the other ones in a different place. The key thing to remember is that look at those squares on your diagram. So the D Dorian, so you know where to play it exactly. I mean, you can see there anyway, it starts on the 2nd fret of the C string, right? But just so you can kind of picture it in your mind, what you want to do, the squares represent the tonic. That just means the root of the scale, what it's named after. So if you want to play D Dorian, you do that green shape starting from the 2nd fret of the C string. And this time the gaps are different again. We've got big gap, little gap, or big gap, no gap, I guess. Then we've got the big gap on its own in the middle. Then on the bottom string, no gap, big gap. So if you want to try that Dorian, from the C string, we've got 2, 4, 5. Then we've got 3, 5, back to 2, 3, 5. Again, just think of it as a shape and you'll start to learn it. Again, notice I've reset my hands. That first note of any of these scales, I tend to use my index and then just use what feels most, use what feels most natural from there, right? Okay, so you always reset, okay? So let's have a look at another one, the G Mixolydian. That sounds all fancy, super fancy, doesn't it? This is a really important one because this has a really interesting personality. If any of you have done my Canacapilla, I know I've got quite a few familiar faces there, so a lot of you have done it. And some of my other videos, you'll know that I talk about chords having personality, like the 1 chord is home, the 4 chord gives a sense of movement, and the 5 chord is tension. My students will have heard me do this a million times, so I apologise. But one of the most important movements in music is the 1st to the 5th and back again. So in the key of C, that means we do the 1st chord, C, and then the 5th chord, C, D, E, F, G. And we'll quite often play that G as a G7. It's the turnaround in blues music, isn't it? And it's the turnaround in Hawaiian music. There's a G to the C. And loads of you, I bet at some point in your ukulele journey, you played a song and you did that at the end. G7 to C. Well, that's the power of the 5 chord. The G7 is your cliffhanger. C is the answer, and it kind of it's one of the most powerful things in music. Vivaldi, again, students, I've told you this before, but Vivaldi used it in the Four Seasons and loads of his pieces. The Four Seasons, if you analyse it in terms of chords rather than notes, it's just 1-5. Do 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 do. That's one. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. That's 5. Do 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 do, etc. etc. So it just goes between 1 and 5. Wow, why am I rambling on about this? The Mixolydian mode is the 5th in the key of C, isn't it? C, D, E, F, G. And when we want to create a sense of tension in a solo, we would often go up to that Mixolydian mode. It kind of creates almost like a need for resolution. I'll give you an example. Let's try a different backing track just for fun. This one's in A minor, but it still works with things in the key of C. So I could be kind of down here. This is mostly C major, Iona. Tension. Did you feel that? Kind of happy again. I'm going to go up to G Mixolydian. Listen for the tension. Really exaggerating it. But did you hear, just by playing a few notes in that G Mixolydian scale, it created a tension. Now, this is where I start getting really crazy excited, and it might be a bit too much for some people. And if it is, doesn't matter. Just knowing what you've learned already is brilliant, right? This is where I think soloists become really great soloists for me. And my favourite soloists and my favourite bands aren't necessarily the ones that play a million notes super quickly, because that's just playing up and down scales and showing off, right? My favourite soloists, I like jazz players. Like Miles Davis is like a really great example, because he'd play a few notes but he'd use the really emotive ones, and I love that. Dizzy Gillespie was great at that as well, in a kind of bebop setting, but they use like really emotive changes. So what a really good soloist will do, will use the different modes to create different feels in a piece of music. Normally you can feel when the 5 chord is coming, or when that 5 needs to come in. Normally it's at the end of, say, 4 bars, or at the end of a line in a piece of music. You've seen it millions of times, haven't you, where it goes to G7 and it kind of needs a kind of sense of resolution. That's where you would use the G Mixolydian. Let's have a go, because it's no good me showing you all this stuff and not getting you to play some. The G Mixolydian is quite nice because it's actually similar to the C major or Ionian scale. It's a really easy shape to learn. The thing is, we've got to go way up to the 7th fret now. Okay, so remember, just like we were going through earlier about starting on the C string, every one of these today are going to start on the C string. We're starting from the 7th fret. Okay, this one's a nice easy shape because we've got a big gap. We've got 7 to 9. Then we've got the same kind of shape again on the bottom 2 strings. We've got 7, 8, 10 and 7, 8, 10 again. Okay, so just practice playing that through me. 7, 8, 7, 8. Sorry, I went wrong. Can we do that again? I said the wrong number. Here we go. 7, 9, 7, 8, 10, 7, 8, 10. Now, if you're getting super tuned into music, see if you notice something. I'll play, just listen. Does that one feel a little bit weird to anyone? Now, it's really interesting if it did. What makes these mixolydians what makes these modes have their own personality is their relation to their own major scale. So a G, don't worry if this is too much for anyone, but just see if you can stay along with me. A G major scale sounds like this. Okay, so you're used to hearing this seventh note here. And the difference between a G mixolydian and a G major is that it has a flat 7. And that's what makes it that's what gives it that intense sense of drama, that really that tension that needs resolving, right? And that's how a lot of people think of these modes in another way. Sometimes you can think of them in relation to the same scale with the same name. So G mixolydian to G. And they all have kind of different intervals that have changed around. So that's a useful thing to learn. I don't want to go into too much detail about that today because it can really open up Pandora's box and it can kind of get to in a confusing sense. But if you think of the relation of them to the same scale with the same name, each one has a different kind of intervallic change, which makes it stand out. So C Ionian is bog standard major. A mixolydian is major with a flatted 7th. A Dorian is a major with a flatted 3rd. And you'll kind of get these as you go. A mixolydian is a major with a sharpened 4th. I had to think about that. I think that's right. Yes, exactly what it is. Just had to check that. Oh, cool. David says, yeah, doesn't it sound like Bread of Heaven? It's amazing because that's the thing, right? So many of these old tunes were created using these modes, which is absolutely brilliant. Now, I want to show you something really magical that's happening now because to me, this is one of the best things about learning these modes. And if this is the only thing you learn today, it's amazing, right? If you can learn a few of them, you can solo all over the fretboard, as I said. So if you have a look at the last page, we did C Ionian and E Phrygian. That covers the kind of lower to middle part of the fretboard, doesn't it? We're going from, say, the open strings up to the 5th, 6th, 7th fret. Then if you learn the Dorian and mixolydian, just thinking they're just two new shapes and they're all very similar. You'll soon get to kind of learn which is which. That's going from the 2nd fret to the 10th fret, so that's taking us up even higher, isn't it? If you want to go super high up the fretboard, you can start adding these ones that I've given their own page. The F Lydian is a really interesting one. Oh, Terry, yeah. Things like that make my day. Thanks, mate. Thank you. I love just imparting this stuff because I was excited when I learned it. So if anyone else is, yes, that's what I want, right? The F Lydian, I don't actually use that much. Partly because the first 4 that I've taught you already covers enough of that fretboard if I'm just taking that scale up, right? So I kind of got enough scales already. But also, in relationship to its own major scale, the F major scale, this is the F major scale. It kind of sounds weird because it has that sharpened 4th. Now, if I just play that slowly again. That's so weird to a lot of ears when you start an F, that a lot of people don't like the Lydian mode, and it's not used very much for composition, where we're just staying within one mode for the whole thing. But it does have a lovely exception. I should have learnt this to be able to play it for you, but do you all know the Simpsons theme? Do 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 do. It's kind of a bit weird when you think about it, isn't it? That first bit. Do 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 do. That's because it uses the Lydian scale. The Lydian scale we think of as the playful scale. It's super bright. It's kind of almost in your face bright because we've sharpened a note. Okay, so that F Lydian's used for like quite kooky, unusual things. Simpsons being a perfect example, right? You want that kind of funkiness and funness of knowing that that's the kind of show that you're going to get, right? If The Simpsons would have been written using the Phrygian mode, Homer would have been like a kind of really depressed figure, wouldn't he? It would have been weird. But because the F Lydian is bright, that's why it's used. Long story short, you can use that F Lydian, but it's not used very commonly in music. That's kind of why I've given it its own page there. And a similar thing about these next ones. The Aeolian is used quite a lot. So the Aeolian has... I would place it between the Dorian and the Phrygian. Okay, again, you can come back to this, so you haven't got to remember all this. But we were saying the Dorian is melancholy. The Phrygian is heartbreak. I place the Aeolian in the middle. It's a major scale, but it's not quite as intense as those two. This one's quite useful to learn. Again, it would just not the best use of today to just go through all these scales, you know, teaching you one at a time. But you can just follow that shape, right? You've just got to notice that on my diagram, the 7th, the 10th and 12th are written in. So this one actually starts from the 9th fret, way up on the C string. And this one goes 9, 11, 12, 10, 12, 13, 10, 12. So it can be useful if you want to solo really high up on your fretboard, because it takes the C major scale into a new place really high up. That can be really nice if you want to add like a real kind of shrillness to your soloing. There's one more, which is the Locrian. Now this very much is like the naughty boy of the modes. Because the Locrian is based around diminished chords, those fellas, the ones that sound really weird, to our ears, it kind of sounds a little bit odd and uncomfortable. The notes are just kind of really strange intervals. So I'm not just saying this, I promise to be lazy. Most musicians don't use the Locrian. And jazz musicians who use modes all the time, they very, very rarely use the Locrian. Or over diminished chords, they would tend to play something called the half-whole scale or the half-whole. Don't worry, if you're not into jazz, you don't need to worry about that. All I'm saying is, when you're learning these modes, I wouldn't necessarily worry about that Locrian. Just know that it's a bit out there. You can learn it if you want to. Okay. Now, here's our final level of learning, which is going to take us from like, oh, hallelujah, to like godlike status. Sorry, that's a bit un-PC, isn't it? You know what I mean. It's going to take us up at a final level, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how you can play these modes in any key. Do you remember at the start I said that all of these modes are technically the C major scale played in different places? And that allows us to play the C major scale all over the fretboard. Whoops, so on and so forth. That's good for the key of C, and I really want you to start with this first. I wouldn't try other keys yet. Just try learning these ones first. But I just want to show you something that is really amazing and really kind of enlightening and helps you out later on, okay? If you think about these scales as a shape, all you need to do them in a different key is start the Ionian in a different place or shift each one up. So say everything we've just done so far has been in the key of C using those modes. Say we wanted to play all the modes in the key of D. All we do is we play exactly the same shapes, but we start 2 frets higher. So I would play the Ionian shape, but it would be called the D Ionian. And I would start it from the 2nd fret of the C string, because the 2nd fret of the G string is a D note. Okay. So if I wanted to play the modes in D major, and I wanted to do all the modes, I would go D Ionian, and that is just your major scale, right? That's just your D major scale. Ionian is your major scale. The next mode in the key of D would be E. Okay, no, it wouldn't. Yeah, it would. That's what a daft moment then. It would be E, but it wouldn't be the E Phrygian, it would be the E Dorian, because everything's shifted up, right? So we would take that Dorian shape and we would start it from the 4th fret instead of the 2nd fret. And then we have the E Dorian. Everything's the same, just shifted up, right? The next one is the Phrygian, isn't it? It was in the key of C. But it wouldn't be E Phrygian because we're in the key of D. Now it would be F sharp. That's just because I know the key of D. The 3rd note in the key of D is F sharp. So I would do F sharp Phrygian. So I'd find an F sharp on my C string, which is the 6th fret, and I would do that Phrygian shape. And I'd do that all the way along. You can move them up. So if you can think of them as shapes, you can just play any of those shapes. Just start from whatever the root note is you're after on the C string, and you can shift it up. And eventually it shifts up so far that you're starting down here. But the magical thing is the later modes just flip down here with the same shapes. It's like magic. It's like magic. But for now, I would just practice in the key of C. Okay. I'm going to start thinking about any questions now, because I'm going to wrap up soon, and there's quite a lot we've covered, and it might link some questions. I'm happy to stay a bit late today. This is my last thing I've got today. So if there's loads of questions, I'll answer all of them if I can, and if I can't, I'll be honest and I'll tell you where to look them up somewhere, okay? So if you've got any questions, start typing them now, because there's always a bit of delay on this. Whilst you're doing that, let me show you one cool thing that you can do with modes, but this is quite advanced. So just in case anyone's itching to go forward to like another stage. What jazz musicians do is they match the modes to chords. So, you know, in any key, we have certain chords that come up all the time. You might not know that, but you will do in a minute, right? So in the key of C, all of the chords, the palette of chords that you'd use to write a song in the key of C are C, D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, and then B diminished. That's all the chords that come up in the key of C, basically. And we think of those chords as numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you're back to 1 again. But what jazz musicians will do is they'll match the modes with the chords. Okay, so when a jazz musician is playing a type of C major chord, rather than C, a lot of jazz musicians will play something groovy like C slit 6 add 9 or C major 7. That's a nice easy one. Over a C major 7 chord, when someone in the band is doing that, they would play C Ionian. Because C is the first chord in the key of C, first note in the key of C, so they would do that, right? And when they were playing a D minor chord, yeah, Jennifer, no worries. You can watch this back as many times as you like, all right? It's never going to disappear. So that goes for all of you. If you think, I was kind of getting it, but I lost it in the last quarter or whatever, totally cool. Just take what you can from it each time and then build your knowledge on top of that. That's how I learn. That I have to watch YouTube videos like 6 or 7 times. It drives my wife mad because I'm watching the same thing again and again and again. But for some reason, by the 5th time, things start to go in. It's just how I work, so you might be the same. So over the C chord, they would play C Ionian if they're a super jazz player. The second chord in the key of C is D minor. So when they're playing a form of D minor or D minor 7, something like that, they would use the D Dorian, because Dorian is the second mode, right? Second chord, D, or D minor. Second mode, D Dorian. So over D minor, whoops, I played the wrong thing there. They'll play D Dorian. And then finally, one last example, a chord that comes up all the time in the key of C is G7, isn't it? That's the 5th chord in C, C, D, E, F, G. Well, they would play the 5th mode, C, D, E, F, G, G Mixolydian. And you get common chord combinations, right, in each key. There's some really common chord combinations that come up again and again and again. One of the most famous chord combinations in jazz is 2, 5, 1. That just means the second chord, D minor, the fifth chord, G7, 1, the first chord. And so a jazz musician would match that by playing Dorian, Mixolydian, and then finishing on Ionian. And you can kind of hear it, even though all of those modes are based on the same notes, because you tend to go back to where you started, and even if you jump a bit intervallically, you generally go up and down a little bit when you're playing solos. You can hear the changes. Have a listen. You should be able to hear almost like a D minor chord as I play this. And then a kind of different flavour chord. And then the one chord. Each one has that flavour, right? And you match it. So, super fancy jazz musician, right? I'm not saying I am. They would play that. So this is a 2-5-1 progression. I'm going back to that jazzy one. D Dorian, G Mixolydian, C Ionian. Notice it matches the feel. D Dorian, G Mixolydian, back to C Ionian, D Dorian, G Mixolydian, C Ionian. Now that's tricky, right? So you can, maybe I'll play it just whilst questions come in. I'll just play it for just for a couple of goes. So if anyone's feeling super crazy, you can have a go, because I know some of you are keen on this stuff. I'll shout them out as I go. This is really tricky, so don't worry. D Dorian, G Mixolydian, C Ionian. You could just pick a couple of notes out of each. We're going to do it again. D Dorian, G Mixolydian, and then twice as many on C Ionian. Okay. This is listed as the jazz backing track in the description on my YouTube. So if you want to try that, if you're feeling a bit more confident later on, you can have a go. So that's how a jazz musician will use modes. Us mortals can actually just use the modes to solo all over the place over the same thing. So you can use any of those modes on a song that's in a key of C, but a jazz musician will alter the mode as the chords change. That's why they're so amazing. People like Charlie Parker, he was able to think in his mind. He's able to hear chord changes that change sometimes in as little as a second, and he would match a flurry of notes from a corresponding scale. It's just mad, right? That's why I love jazz. People think of it as inaccessible, but I think of it as like, what? That's just incredible. I wish I could do that. I can do it very, very slowly. I can't do it like he does. It's just amazing, right? But even though we're just going to experiment playing all those modes all over the place in the key of C, that's what I'd really like you to do. Maybe think about the flavour. Maybe if you want a little bit of tension, go up to that G Mixolydian mode. If the song feels a bit sad or you want that kind of sadness, stick with the E Phrygian. If you want something very straightforward, you're going to stick with the Ionian. I'm going to take some of these questions now, so any more, just give us a shout. Let's have a look. So we've got a few that come in too. There we go. Oh. So Trevor, I might have kind of answered that in the last bit I was doing. You probably wrote that before I did. So Trevor's asking, so most solos for songs relate to the melody of the song and not just the chord sequence. Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I get you, Trevor. No, I get you. This is something I was doing in the Canacapella that I did on Monday, where we talk about soloing and stuff. A nice thing to do is to touch on the original melody. trying to remember what we did we? So just trying to remember a melody off the top of my head, and I'm struggling. Give me a second, guys. Let me think. Oh, there we go. Okay, here's a good example, Trevor. I won't and for everyone else as well. So Trevor said, you know, when you get a solo, sometimes it feels like it relates to the melody, doesn't it? And then it kind of goes off on its own thing. And I like to do that sometimes in soloing. So Sarah was playing White Sandy Beach. I saw you in my dreams. We were holding hand in hand on a white sandy beach of Hawaii. I might start that solo by kind of quoting the melody. And then you could do that a couple of times. I saw you in my dreams. And then go off on a little wander. Something like that. I'll give you an example. I've got White Sandy Beach on here, I think. Is it in the key of C? Let's just have a check. I think it might be. Have a listen. This is a backing track. Yeah, this is in the key of F. So, sorry, this one's in the key of F, but the same thing applies. So I might start my solo quoting the melody. Oh, it's a bit too slow. Sorry, guys. And then I might wander. And I might come back to the melody for the next bit. So that's a nice thing to try. So maybe quote from the melody in your solos, but then take it into another place. That's one of my favourite little things. In fact, one of my favourite things in jazz songs, you might have heard it, is where they quote from a different song. There's some really cheesy ones that they do in jazz music. For some reason, in the 1940s, when Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker and that were playing, they always used to quote from an English country garden. So you'd be hearing like this super like, and then you go, and then they'd be back to their playing. And I guess it was just showing off, you know, but I think it's good fun anyway. So let's just take a few more. So Esther, this is just for you because most people wouldn't be playing over diminished chords, but over a diminished chord you would usually use something called an altered scale, the whole half scale, which is a symmetrical scale. It just goes whole half, whole half, whole half forever in steps, or the half whole, half whole, half whole, half whole. So most jazz musicians would use, say, a Dorian over a minor chord, Ionian over a major chord, mixed Lydian over the 5 chords, and then when they used a diminished chord they would use the whole half or half whole scale or the altered scale. I can send them to you later, Esther, because they're quite difficult to explain those, but that's what they would do. Locrian's almost never used, so yeah, kind of avoid that. Let's have a look at a few more. Jennifer, yeah, everyone that we've done today, all the backing tracks are in the key of C, with one exception. There's one that's in the key of A minor. It's this one here. It has a kind of quite an intense kind of, let's just, you can hear that minor quality, right? This one I've listed as the A minor scale, the A minor backing track. And because it has that minor feel, I like to solo over the Phrygian using this one. But the reason I use that one, the A minor, is that every major key, some of you might already know this, every major key has a minor key which has all of the same notes in it. So a C major scale has all the same notes as an A minor scale. It's just the A minor starts from A. So A minor is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and C major is C, D, E, F, G, A, B. They're all exactly the same notes, just starting from a different place. And every major scale has a corresponding minor scale. We call that the relative minor. So C, it's A, F, it's D minor, G, it's E minor. The way to work it out quickly, if you want to get the corresponding minor scale, is you just count up 6. So if C major, C, D, E, F, G, it's the same as A minor. G major, G, A, B, C, D, E, it's the same as, G major, it's the same as E minor. That's useful because you've got 2 for the price of 1 basically. So any song that's in the key of A minor, you can use any of the C major modes to solo over. Any song that's in the key of E minor, you could use any of the G major modes. So you what the long and short of this is, I'm telling you, is you only ever really have to learn these in relation to a major scale, because the relative minor means that there's always one that matches. All right. So these shapes, these are the only shapes you ever have to learn for your modes. They just move up and down in pitch. And then if you know your relative minor, that's it. You don't need any other modes. So if a song is in the key of A minor, you'd use all the C major modes. And if a song was in another example, if a song was in the key of D minor, F major is its relative major, so you'd use the F major ones. All right. Again, might take a minute for that to kind of all absorb in. Like I say, my brain needs things repeating heaps of times, so it might take a while to think about that. But yeah, these shapes will go with everything. I think that might be what we've got here as well. So same notes, same shapes. What difference does it make soloing in pentatonic major C or pentatonic minor A? Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's a similar thing to what I was just saying. So say you are in a tune that's in the key of C major. If you use the C major pentatonic, it will sound really happy and bright. If you use the A minor pentatonic, because it's got that minor feel, it's going to sound a little bit darker. They're the same notes. It's mad, isn't it? It's just like these modes. But because we often start and end the A minor pentatonic on an A, it has a minor feel. And because we start and end the major on a C, it has that major feel. So yeah, but some people flip it. Some people like the sound of an A minor pentatonic on a C major song because it sounds a little bit more exotic. I'll quite often do that. I'll usually use the relative minor to solo over. I think it sounds really nice. Let's see a few more. Bum, bum, bum. Oh, good, Trevor. I asked. Good. I answered your question as well, which is absolutely brilliant. I'll see if there are any others up here. I think I've got most of them. Yeah. Hi, Richard. I loved your emails, by the way. Thanks, mate. Yeah, G Mixolydian, the glorious section of Ding Dong merrily on high, da 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 da, da Gloria. Yeah, you're right. It uses the G Mixolydian. That would be a nice thing. See if anyone can spot these in songs. So just quickly, just in case there's any more questions to come in, I'll just kind of ramble for a minute, just in case anyone's interested. So just like a brief history of the modes. So a lot of medieval music going forward. So if you think of old church music and also medieval music, things like Greensleeves, they were written in modes. And again, so that each had a kind of different flavour. Because a lot of that stuff wasn't written using chords, fretted instruments are relatively recent. I know you had like Renaissance guitar and stuff like that. But most instruments were melodic, they weren't harmonic, they weren't using chords, they were using notes. So earlier music tended to be written in modes, and then they would choose one of those modes from bright to dark that they thought fit the piece. And that's why a lot of early music has that certain feel. For some reason, we're not entirely sure. I think it has something to do with the need for orchestras to not have to do all different modes. We tend to just do major or minor, but for some reason in about, I think it's like 17th 18th century onwards, when you get into the classical period, orchestras and composers started to write just using major or minor scales. I guess it made it easier, didn't it, for all the players and everything, all the different people in the orchestra. So rather than, say, writing a whole song in D Dorian, they would probably write it in D minor, just typical minor scale. Or if they wanted a more kind of happy sound, they would go for a major scale. And then the only reason for the different pitches, some people think they have different sounds. I don't know, but the reason for the pitches would just be to suit the instrument, I suppose. So yeah. There was one thing I didn't tell you which is quite useful to know, and it's a tiny little detail, and all this is in my music theory book if you want to have it at your fingertips. The C, I told you that the Ionian scale is the same as the major scale, just like a bog standard major scale, do, re, mi. So any Ionian is the same as the major scale. I just thought it'd be interesting if you knew, because it helps to kind of compare modes, that the Aeolian scale, which is the sixth one along, that's your natural minor scale. And again, that links into the relative major minor, right? One major, the relative minor is 6, and this is the sixth mode, it's Aeolian. So the Aeolian in any key is your natural minor scale, and your Ionian in any key is your natural major scale. And then the others are kind of variations of that. Okay, so the Lydian, we say, relates to the major scale because it's a major scale of a sharp and fourth. The Mixolydian relates to the major scale because it's a major scale of a flatted seventh. The Dorian relates to the minor scale because it's like a minor scale with a sharpened seventh. And the, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, the Locrian's different because that's diminished. What's the other? Oh yeah, of course, Phrygian is the other minor scale as well. So I don't know if that's any interest. That might be too much anyway, and I'm just kind of blathering a bit at the end. But just know, in any key, the Ionian is the natural major and the Aeolian is the natural minor. So yeah. Richard's asked, what if the chords change key? Yes, I get. Yeah. I guess if the chords, if the key center changed for a large piece of music, you would perhaps start to think of the modes in another key. So if a song was in the key of C, and then suddenly it shifted to the key of D, you would use all the modes in D major. But it's quite unusual to get key shifts that last very long. If you get, this happens occasionally in songs where you get chords that are borrowed from another key. So you might expect an A minor in the key of C and you get an A major or something like that. Instead it happens. Generally you can get away with just playing the modes from C over the whole thing, for instance, if it's in the key of C. So unless you have a major tonal shift where it changes for a large piece of the music, I would pretty much stay where I am. And the other thing, just finished, I know I'm going on and I've probably lost most of you by now, but don't forget the power of using your ears. I know it sounds really silly, but we've talked so much about notes and modes and scales and everything, but sometimes just trust your ears if something sounds wrong. If you're playing in a piece of music and it goes out of key just temporarily and it sounds wrong, just see if you can find the note that it does resolve to. And I always say, this again, I'm taking a phrase that someone else has already coined. There's no wrong note as long as you resolve it. And I've got a lovely example. Let me play that A minor backing track. Okay, so all the notes in the key of C would fit this one. I could start by playing the notes of the pentatonic, A minor pentatonic. Where is it? These are all the notes of A minor pentatonic, so they all fit. But I could play notes that shouldn't work. that's a really nice example there. I'm just going to pause for a second. I was playing a C note and a D note, which these fit in the key of C and A minor, right? C and D. But if I'm really careful, I can get away with a C sharp note. There's no way that should fit. And if I play it on its own, it sounds horrible. Right? But if I'm really careful and I resolve it, I can get away with it. So if you're playing a note and it doesn't sound right, or relating back to Richard's point, if you're playing in a piece of music and it just temporarily shifts out of key and something's not sounding quite right, just move it up or down a little bit and you can find a note that does sound right. Just stay on there a little bit until you're more confident, right? And if you look at those modes there, which are all notes from the C major scale, aren't they? Have a look. If you could count them up, ignore the G string because we're not touching that at the moment because of high G, low G. There are more right notes on that fretboard than there are wrong notes. And that's a really key thing. People get really scared when they're soloing to do the wrong thing. But sometimes when you do the wrong thing, that's when your solos take on a really lovely flavour. As long as you resolve it, you can get away with it and still sounds good. And because there are more right notes than wrong notes, if you analyse that diagram and look really carefully, any time you play a wrong note, you're only one fret away from a right note. Isn't that amazing? So any time you're playing a solo and you hit one that sounds a bit stinky, like that, just move it up or down. I'll do another one on purpose. Okay, that one shouldn't have been there. But as long as I resolve it, it sounds great. So don't be scared to experiment. And if the last kind of cliche I'm going to do for the whole of today, and then I'm going to let people go. If it sounds good, it is good. If you ever play a note that doesn't fit in one of those scales and it sounds good, that doesn't matter. Play it, enjoy it, right? Trust your ears. If something sounds good, it is good. Okay. Well, I hope everyone really, really enjoyed that. I certainly did. Sorry if I got a bit carried away. Sometimes I mean to teach you one thing and then I get carried away and I want to show you all the things in the world and I get a bit carried away, but hopefully there was enough nuggets in there that would just kind of open up the worlds of modes. And if nothing else, if you think you can extend your major scales out by just learning those modal shapes, that's such a brilliant thing. You'll be able to play so much more on your ukulele, which is absolutely fantastic. As my friend Sarah Maisel always says, if you've paid for 14 frets, you better use them. There's no good just playing the first 3, is there? So yeah, thanks guys. I hope you enjoyed that. And remember, if you're really into your soloing and you're enjoying it, come along to my Canacapilla sessions. They're every Monday at 6 o'clock. And one of the main things that I like to do is I like to give you a chance to practice this stuff, because how often do you actually get to practice this? So you can come along and I teach you to play by ear using kind of the number system. But every time we do a song, I show you a scale that will work with it. So why not come along next Saturday, I'll be at the football on next Saturday. Why not come along next Monday, even at 6 o'clock, and you can practice all this stuff you've learned. And as if by magic, this is actually a pure coincidence. We're mostly looking at songs in the key of C on Monday, so you could come and practice your modes. And as I said, the next one's a really special one because we're doing some really beautiful kind of ballads and songs that I think really kind of help combat loneliness and help people feel good. So this Monday, come along, and I'd love it if you would, rather than sending me anything. I'll survive. I'll eat beans on toast that night. I'll be fine. I want you to send your donation to Mind instead, and there's a link on there of how to do that. And of course, like I said, the backing tracks are available in the description. They're all just free YouTube backing tracks, so all the ones I used today you can practice to your heart's content at home. Thanks guys, just putting up some of your messages, so thank you, really appreciate it. And if you want to, just kind of do a little bit of a YouTube search, because you'll find loads of good stuff on there. So much of my backing tracks, I literally just go to Google, I type in backing track key of C, bosh. There's loads of them, and they all have different feels. Some of them are up tempo, some of them are down tempo, so you can kind of have a little practice. Sometimes you can even specify chord combinations, like that jazz one. I put in 2-5-1 chords, key of C, and you wouldn't believe it, loads of videos came up, and they're all great, so you can have a little practice like that, so have fun. I'm going to bring up Trevor's comment to finish on, because that's a good one. More right notes than wrong notes. And there's the other one, isn't there? There's no such thing as a wrong note. It's just a matter of opinion. So Louis Armstrong used to say, if you play a wrong note in one verse, play it again in the second verse, and everyone will think you meant to play it. So that's a good one to do as well. So thanks, guys. Just bringing some of these lovely messages up. Thank you so much. And Richard, totally right. I love soloing with modes because it's more expressive. You're not just hitting the same notes over and over again. You're kind of colouring them, aren't you? You're kind of matching them to bits in the song. And I'll quite often just pick 1 or 2 or 3 modes. So the most common ones I'll use are Ionian, because that's your classic happy major. The Dorian, because it's a little bit sad. And then the Mixolydian, because that gives you the tension. And between those 3, you can make your solos sound absolutely gorgeous. So yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, plain. I do that all the time, Richard. Cool. Right, I'm going to say bye now. If anyone has any further questions, or they got really stuck on anything, you can always contact me. I'm just matt@theukeroom.com. So matt@that.com. matt@theukeroom.com. And if you've got any ideas for future sessions, let me know. The next one kind of looks into something I hinted at when we're doing the soloing. We look at how to get a really gorgeous tone out of your ukulele, so we can alter it. Wow, like a banjo. Or totally smooth. So we're going to look all about tone production, how to make your playing sound absolutely fab. That's going to be in 2 weeks' time. All of my live lessons are every other Wednesday at 3:30. And one last bit for anyone that's still hanging on. Thank you for those that have, my soldiers that stuck it out to the end. Remember, all of these live lessons will be eventually listed on my website, mattsteadukulele.com. Matt with 2 T's. STEAD ukulele.com. You just Google Matt Stead Ukulele and you'll find it. So all of the old live lessons are there if you missed any, or if you just find one interesting. And you can still download all the sheets for those as well. The links will all be up there. So have fun, and you can come back to this one anytime as well. So if I don't see you on Monday, hopefully I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. If I don't see you then, I'll see you when I see you. You take care, you come, have fun, and get modal. Cheers, everyone. Bye.